Hello? I'm so sorry, guys. My internet got disconnected. We'll see. I will check first what happened. Okay, hold on. Be back in a minute. Alright, I'm back. My goodness, my internet disconnected on me. I just listened in on the previous stream and I was talking here non-stop, and then apparently you only heard up till the barbecue. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh, okay. Hold on. I will have to inform Twitter about this because some people might follow this. I need to let you know. So, how is the story so far? Are you liking it? Here is part 2 of Sinbad and the Seven Seas. Alright? From where we got disconnected. Oh my gosh. Technical difficulties are abound. Let me just grab a picture for this. And then let us continue. Alright, so where did we last end the story? The captain was getting roasted in a pit, if I remember correctly. Oh, there we go. I found it. Alright. Ready to get started again. Hi! Hi, Therese! Thank you! Welcome back! I know. I'm glad it's back too. Oh my gosh. The internet. I didn't realize that could happen. But that's okay. It's a new learning. It happens. Alright. Hold on. I need to check a few things before we get started. Hold on. I should have notifications. All you guys are telling me that it got the stream got cut, and I didn't even realize. Oh my goodness, I'm so unaware. Okay, let's get started again. Oh my gosh, can't believe this. Anyway, where did we stop? The captain being the fattest, right? Alright. Okay. Alright. So the captain, being the fattest, he held him with one hand as I would do a sparrow, and thrust a spit through him. He then kindled a great fire, roasted him, and ate him in his apartment for his supper. Having finished his repast, he returned to his porch, where he lay and fell asleep, snoring louder than thunder. He slept thus till morning as to ourselves, and it was not possible for us to enjoy any rest. So that we passed that night in the most painful apprehension that can be imagined. When day appeared, the giant awoke, got up, went out, and left us in the palace. When we thought him at a distance, we broke the melancholy silence we had preserved the whole of the night, and filled the palace with our lamentations and groans. We spent the day in traversing the island, supporting ourselves with fruits and herbs as we had done that day before. In the evening we sought for some place of shelter, but found none, so that we were forced, whether we would or not, to go back to the palace. The giant failed not to return, and we supped once more upon one of our companions. After which he slept and snored till day, and then went out and left us as before. Our situation appeared to us so dreadful that several of my comrades designed to throw themselves into the sea, rather than die so painful a death, upon which one of the company answered that it would be much more reasonable to devise some method to rid ourselves of the monster. Having thought of a project for this purpose, I communicated it to my comrades, who approved it. "Brethren," said I, "you know that there is much timber floating upon the coast. If you will be advised by me, let us make several rafts capable of bearing us in the meantime. We will carry out the design I propose to you for our deliverance from the giant, and if it succeed, we may remain here patiently, awaiting the arrival of some ship. But if it happen to miscarry, we will take to our rafts and put to sea." The advice was approved, and we made rafts capable of carrying 3 persons on each. Ooh, that's stuttering. Hold on, I need water. Alright. Where did we stop? Oh, there we go. My advice was approved, and we made rafts capable of carrying 3 persons on each. We returned to the palace toward the evening, and the giant arrived shortly after. We were forced to submit to seeing another one of our comrades roasted, but at last we revenged ourselves on the brutish giant in the following manner. Hold on, sorry, somebody messaged me again. Gosh, everybody's just telling me how I got cut off. I'm so sorry. I didn't even realize. Oh my gosh, I need to figure out a way to get notified, because Streamlabs didn't notify me that the stream got cut off. So I was talking for 10 minutes without knowing that, it was already cut off. Oh my gosh. Anyway. Oh boy. This is a very stressful Tall Tales with Kaiko right now. But no, it's okay. We can relax. This is the 3rd story. We have 4 more stories to go, And I liked how this is going with the Cyclops. It's very interesting. And since I have read further along than the rest of you so far, I know what's happening. I know what's gonna happen. This is very interesting. Alright? So, let's go back to the story so far. Alright. So, we returned to the palace toward the evening, and the giant arrived shortly after. We were forced to submit to seeing another one of our comrades roasted, but at last we revenged ourselves on the brutish giant in the following manner. After he had finished his supper, he lay down on his back and fell asleep. As soon as we heard him snore, according to his custom, 9 of the boldest among us and myself took each of us a spit, and putting the points to them into the fire till they were burning hot, we thrust them into his eye all at once and blinded him. The pain made him break out into a frightful yell. He started up and stretched out his hands in order to sacrifice some of his rage. But we ran to such places as he could not reach, and after having sought for us in vain, he groped for the gate and went out, howling in agony. Thanks, Space Panini. Thank you for coming back. Yeah, fighting. We got this, alright? My goodness, our internet. So, we quitted the palace after the giant and came to the shore, where we had left our rafts, and put them immediately to sea. We waited till day in order to get upon them in case the giant should come towards us with any guide of his own species. But we hoped if he did not appear by sunrise and gave over his howling, which we still heard, that he would prove to be dead. And if that happened, we resolved to stay in that island, and not to risk our lives upon the rafts. But day had scarcely appeared when we perceived our cruel enemy, accompanied with 2 others almost of the same size, leading him, and a great number more coming before him at a quick pace. We did not hesitate to take our rafts and put to sea with all the speed we could. The giants who perceived this took up great stones, and running to the shore, entered the water up to the middle, and threw so exactly that they sunk all the rafts but that I was upon, and all my companions except the 2 with me who were drowned. We rowed with all our might, and escaped the giants, but when we got out to sea, we were exposed to the mercy of the waves and winds, and spent that night and the following day under the most painful uncertainty as to our fate. But next morning we had the good fortune to be thrown upon an island, where we landed with much joy. We found excellent fruit, which afforded us great relief, and recruited our strength. At night we went to sleep on the seashore, but were awakened by the noise of a sea serpent, and of a surprising length and thickness, whose scales made a rustling noise as he wound himself along. It swallowed up one of my comrades, notwithstanding his loud cries, and the efforts he made to extricate himself from it. Dashing him several times against the ground, it crushed him, and we could hear it gnaw and tear the poor wretch's bones, though we had fled to a considerable distance. As we walked about, when day returned, we saw a tall tree upon which we designed to pass the following night for our security, and having satisfied our hunger with fruit, we mounted it before the dusk had fallen. Shortly after, the serpent came hissing to the foot of the tree, and raised itself up against the trunk of it, and meeting with my comrade, who sat lower than I, swallowed him at once and went off. I remained upon the tree till it was day, and then came down more like a dead man, more than alive. Expecting the same fate as my 2 companions, this filled me with horror, and I advanced some steps to throw myself into the sea. But I withstood this dictate of despair, and submitted myself to the will of God. In the meantime, I collected a great quantity of small wood, brambles, and dry thorns, and making them up into faggots, made a wide circle with them round the tree, and also tied some of them to the branches over my head. Having done this, when the evening came, I shut myself up within this circle, feeling that I had neglected nothing which could preserve me from the cruel destiny with which I was threatened. The serpent failed not to come at the usual hour, and went around the tree, seeking for an opportunity to devour me, but was prevented by the rampart I had made, so that he lay till day like a cat, watching in vain for a mouse that has fortunately reached a place of safety. When day appeared, he retired, but I dared not to leave my fort until the sun arose. I felt so much fatigued by the labor to which I had put myself, and suffered so much from the serpent's poisonous breath that death seemed more eligible to me than the horrors of such a state. I came down from the tree and was going to throw myself into the sea when God took compassion on me and perceived the ship. I perceived the ship at a considerable distance. I called as loud as I could, and taking the linen from my turban, displayed it, that they might observe me. This had the desired effect. The crew perceived me, and the captain sent his boat for me. As soon as I came on board, the merchants and seamen flocked about me to know how I came into that desert island. And after I had related to them all that had befallen me, the oldest among them said that they had often heard of giants that dwelt on that island, that they were cannibals, and as to the serpents, they added that there were an abundance of them that hid themselves by day and came abroad by night. After having testified their joy at my escaping so many dangers, they brought me the best of their provisions, and the captain, seeing that I was in rags, was so generous as to give me one of his own suits. We continued this at sea for some time, touched at several islands, and at last landed at that of Salabat, where sandalwood is obtained, which is of great use in medicine. We entered the port and came to anchor. The merchants began to unload their goods in order to sell or exchange them. In the meantime, the captain came to me and said, "Brother, I have here some goods that belong to a merchant, who sailed some time on board this ship, and he, being dead, I designed to dispose of them for the benefit of his heirs." The bales he spoke of lay on the deck, and showing them to me, he said, "There are the goods. I hope you will take care to sell them, and you shall have factorage." I thanked him for thus affording me an opportunity of employing myself, because I hated to be idle. The clerk of the ship took an account of all the bales, with the names of the merchants of whom they belonged. And when he asked the captain in whose name he should enter those he had given me the charge of, "Enter them," said the captain, "in the name of Sinbad." He is one lucky guy. This is the second time he got his own bales back. I could not hear myself named without some emotion, and looking steadfastly on the captain, I knew him to be the person who, in my second voyage, had left me in the island where I fell asleep. I was not surprised that he believed me to be dead. Sorry? Hold on. Oh, there. I was not surprised that he, believing me to be dead, did not recognize me. "Captain," said I, "was the merchant's name to whom these bales belonged Sinbad?" "Yes," replied he, "that was his name. He came from Baghdad, and embarked on board my ship at Bussorah." "You believe him, then, to be dead?" said I. "Certainly," answered he. "No, captain," resumed I. "Look at me, and you may know that I am Sinbad." The captain, having considered me attentively, recognized me. "God be praised," said he, embracing me. "I rejoice that fortune had rectified my fault. There are your goods, which I always took care to preserve." I took them from him, and made him the acknowledgments to which he was entitled. From the Isle of Salabat we went to another, where I furnished myself with cloves, cinnamon, and other spices. As we sailed from this island, we saw a tortoise 20 cubits in length and breadth. We observed also an amphibious animal like a cow, which gave milk. Its skin is so hard that they usually make bucklers of it. In short, after a long voyage, I arrived at Bussorah, and from thence returned to Baghdad, with so much wealth that I knew not its extent. I gave a great deal to the poor, and bought another considerable estate, in addition to what I had already. Thus Sinbad finished the history of his third voyage, gave another 100 sequins to Hindbad, and invited him to dinner again the next day to hear the story of his fourth series of adventures. Oh my gosh, okay. So, taking a break, Oh, fourth voyage this time. Hi, Enchanted Alpha! Welcome to the chat! My goodness. Yeah, it was an adventure getting to this point, you know? The first stream failed, but now we have two parts of this story. Okay, just gonna take a water break before I continue with the fourth voyage. Alright. The fourth voyage. The pleasures which I enjoyed after my third voyage had not charms sufficient to divert me from another. My passion for trade and my love of novelty again prevailed. I therefore settled my affairs, and having provided a stock of goods fit for the traffic I designed to engage in, I set out on my journey. I took the route of Persia, travelled over several provinces, and then arrived at a port where I embarked. We hoisted our sails and touched at several ports of the continent, and then put out to sea. When we were overtaken by such a sudden gust of wind as obliged the captain to lower his yards and take all other necessary precautions to prevent the danger that threatened us. But all was in vain. Our endeavours had no effect. The sails were split in 1,000 pieces, and the ship was stranded. Several of the merchants and seamen were drowned, and the cargo was lost. I had the good fortune, with several of the merchants and mariners, to get upon some planks, and we were carried by the current to an island which lay before us. There we found fruit and spring water, which preserved our lives. We stayed all night near the place where we had been cast ashore, and next morning, as soon as the sun was up, advancing into the island, saw some houses, which we approached. As soon as we drew near, we were encompassed by a great number of negroes, who seized us and carried us to their respective habitations. I and 5 of my comrades were carried to one place. Here they made us sit down, and gave us a certain herb, which they made signs for us to eat. My comrades, not taking notice that the blacks ate none of it themselves, thought only of satisfying their hunger, and ate with greediness. But I, suspecting some trick, would not so much as taste it, which happened well for me, for in a little time after I perceived my companions had lost their senses, and that, when they spoke to me, they knew not what they said. The negroes fed us afterward with rice, prepared with oil of cocoa nuts, and my comrades, who had lost their reason, ate of it greedily. I also partook of it, but very sparingly. They gave us that herb at first on purpose, to deprive us of our senses, that we might not be aware of the sad destiny prepared for us. And they supplied us with rice to fatten us, for being cannibals, their design was to eat us as soon as we grew fat. This accordingly happened, for they devoured my comrades, who were not sensible of their condition. But my senses being entire, you may easily guess that instead of growing fat, I grew leaner every day. The fear of death under which I labored caused me to fall into a languishing distemper, which proved my safety, for the negroes, having eaten my companions, seeing me to be withered and sick, deferred my death. Meanwhile I had much liberty, so that scarcely any notice was taken of what I did. Let's do that again. Meanwhile I had much liberty, so that scarcely any notice was taken of what I did. And this gave me an opportunity one day to get at a distance from the houses and to make my escape. An old man who saw me and suspected my design called to me as loud as he could to return, but I redoubled my speed and quickly got out of sight. At that time there was none but the old man about the houses, and the rest being abroad, and not to return till night, which was usual with them. Therefore, being sure that they could not arrive in time enough to pursue me, I went on till night, when I stopped to rest a little, and to eat some of the provisions I had secured. But I speedily set forward again, and travelled 7 days, avoiding those places which seemed to be inhabited, and lived for the most part upon cocoanuts, which served me both for meat and drink. On the 8th day I came near the sea, and saw some white people like myself gathering pepper, of which there was great plenty in that place. This I took to be a good omen, and went to them without any scruple. They came to meet me as soon as they saw me, and asked me in Arabic who I was, and whence I came. I was overjoyed to hear them speak in my own language, and satisfied their curiosity by giving them an account of my shipwreck, and how I fell into the hands of the negroes. Those negroes replied, "They eat men, and by what miracle did you escape their cruelty?" I related to them the circumstances I have just mentioned, at which they were wonderfully surprised. I stayed with them till they had gathered their quantity of pepper, and then sailed with them to the island from whence they had come. They presented me to their king, who was a good prince. He had patience to hear the relation of my adventures, and he afterward gave me clothes, and commanded care to be taken of me. The island was very well peopled, plentiful in everything, and the capital a place of great trade. This agreeable retreat was very comfortable to me, after my misfortunes, and the kindness of this generous prince completed my satisfaction. In a word, there was not a person more in favor with him than myself, and consequently every man in court and city sought to oblige me, so that in a very little time I was looked upon rather than as a native than a stranger. I observed one thing which to me appeared very extraordinary. All the people, the king himself not excepted, rode their horses without bridle or stirrups. This made me one day take the liberty to ask the king how it came to pass. His Majesty answered that I talked to him of things which nobody knew the use of in his dominions. I went immediately to a workman, and gave him a model for making the stock of a saddle. When that was done, I covered it myself with velvet and leather, and embroidered it with gold. I afterward went to a smith, who made me a bit according to the pattern I showed him, and also some stirrups. When I had all things completed, I presented them to the king, and put them upon one of his horses. His Majesty mounted immediately, and was so pleased with them that he testified his satisfaction by large presents. As I paid my court very constantly to the king, he said to me one day, "Sinbad, I love thee, and I have one thing to demand of thee, which thou must grant." "Sir," answered I, "there is nothing but I will do as a mark of my obedience to your Majesty." "I have a mind thou shouldest marry," replied he, "that so thou mayest stay in my dominions, and think no more of thy own country." I durst not resist the prince's will, and he gave me one of the ladies of his court, noble, beautiful, and rich. The ceremonies of marriage being over, I went and dwelt with my wife, and for some time we lived together in perfect harmony. I was not, however, satisfied with my banishment, therefore designed to make my escape the first opportunity, and to return to Baghdad. At this time, the wife of one of my neighbors fell sick and died. I went to see and comfort him in his affliction, and finding him absorbed in sorrow, I said to him as soon as I saw him, "God preserve you and grant you a long life." "Alas," replied he, "how do you think I should obtain the favor you wish me? I have not above an hour to live." "Pray," said I, "do not entertain such melancholy thought. I hope I shall enjoy your company many years." "I wish you," he replied, "a long life, but my days are at an end, for I must be buried this day with my wife. This is a law which our neighbors established in this island, and it is always observed. The living husband is interred with the dead wife, and the living wife with the dead husband. Nothing can save me. Everyone must submit to this law." While he was giving me an account of this barbarous custom, the very relation of which chilled my blood. His kindred friends and neighbors came in a body to assist at the funeral. They dressed the corpse of the woman in her richest apparel and all her jewels as if it had been her wedding day. Then they placed her in an open coffin and began their march to the place of burial, the husband walking at the head of the company. They proceeded to a high mountain, and when they had reached the place of their destination, they took up a large stone, which covered the mouth of a deep pit, and let down the corpse with all its apparel and jewels. Then the husband, embracing his kindred and friends, suffered himself without resistance to be put into another open coffin with a pot of water and 7 small loaves, and was let down in the same manner. The ceremony being over, the aperture was again covered with a stone, and the company returned. It is needless for me to tell you that I was a melancholy spectator of this funeral. While the rest were scarcely moved, the custom was to them so familiar. I could not forbear communicating to the king my sentiment respecting the practice. "Sir," I said, "I cannot but feel astonished at the strange usage observed in this country of burying the living with the dead. I have been a great traveler and seen many countries, but never heard of such cruel a law." "What do you mean, Sinbad?" replied the king. "It is a common law. I shall be interred with my queen, my wife, if she died first." "But, sir," said I, "may I presume to ask your majesty if strangers be obliged to observe this law?" "Without a doubt," returned the king, "they are not exempted, if they be married on this island." I returned home, much depressed by this answer, for the fear of my wife's dying first, and that I should be interred alive with her, occasioned me very uneasy reflections. But there was no remedy. I must have patience and submit to the will of God. I trembled, however, at every little indisposition of my wife, and alas, in a little time my fears were realized, for she fell sick and died. The king and all his courts expressed their wish to honor the funeral with their presence, and the most considerable people of the city did the same. When all was ready for the ceremony, the corpse was put into a coffin with all her jewels and her most magnificent apparel. The procession began, and as a second actor in this doleful tragedy, I went next to the corpse, with my eyes full of tears, bewailing my deplorable fate. Before we reached the mountain, I made an attempt to affect the minds of the spectators. I addressed myself to the king first, and then to all those who were around me, bowing before them to the earth, and kissing the border of their garments. I prayed to them to have compassion on me. "Consider," said I, "that I am a stranger, and ought not to be subject to this rigorous law, and that I have another wife and children in my own country." Although I spoke in the most pathetic manner, no one was moved by my address. On the contrary, they ridiculed my dread of death as cowardly, made haste to let my wife's corpse into the pit, and lowered me down the next moment in an open coffin with a vessel full of water and 7 loaves. As I approached the bottom, I discovered, by the aid of the little light that came from above, the nature of this subterranean place. It seemed an endless cavern, and might be about 50 fathoms deep. Instead of losing my courage and calling death to my assistance in that miserable condition, however, I felt still an inclination to live, and to do all I could to prolong my days. I went groping about for the bread and water that was in my coffin, and took some of it. Though the darkness of the cave was so great that I could not distinguish day and night, yet I always found my coffin again, and the cave seemed to be more spacious than it had appeared to be at first. I lived for some days upon my bread and water, which being all spent, I at last prepared for death. "Hi, Marcos Vinicius! Welcome to the chat! Hola!" Hola, hola. I was offering up my last devotions when I heard something tread, and breathing or panting as it walked. Okay. Boa noite. Did I pronounce it correctly this time? Boa noite. It's fine, go ahead. Just relax. Get ready to sleep or something. As I continue to read the story of Sinbad and the seven seas. So I was offering up my last devotions when I heard something tread, and breathing or panting as it walked. I advanced toward the side from whence I heard the noise, and on my approach, the creature puffed and blew harder, as if running away from me. I followed the noise, and the thing seemed to stop sometimes, but always fled and blew as I approached. I pursued it for a considerable time, till at last I perceived a light resembling a star. I went on sometimes, lost sight of it, but always found it again, and at last discovered that it came through a hole in the rock, large enough to admit a man. Upon this, I stopped some time to rest, being much fatigued with the rapidity of my progress. Afterward, coming up to the hole, I got through and found myself upon the seashore. I leave you to guess the excess of my joy. It was such that I could scarcely persuade myself that the hole was not a dream. Oh, well, this is perfect then. Boa noite, Marcus Vinicius. But when I was recovered from my surprise, and convinced of the reality of my escape, I perceived what I had followed to be a creature which came out of the sea, and was accustomed to enter the cavern when the tides were high. I examined the mountain, and found it to be situated betwixt the sea and the town, but without any passage or communication with the latter. The rocks on the sea side being high and perpendicularly steep, I prostrated myself on the shore to thank God for this mercy, and afterward entered the cave again to fetch bread and water, which I ate by daylight with a better appetite than I had done since my interment in the dark cavern. I returned thither a second time, and groped among the coffin for all the diamonds, rubies, pearls, gold bracelets, and rich stuffs I could find. These I brought to the shore, and tying them up neatly into bales, I laid them together upon the beach, waiting till some ship might appear. After 2 or 3 days, I perceived a ship just come out of the harbor, making for the place where I was. I made a sign with the linen of my turban, and called to the crew as loud as I could. They heard me, and sent a boat to bring me on board. When they asked by what misfortune I came thither, I told them that I had suffered a shipwreck 2 days before, and made shift to get ashore with the goods they saw. It was fortunate for me that these people did not consider the place where I was, nor inquire into the probability of what I had told them, but without hesitation took me on board. When I came to the ship, the captain was so well pleased to have saved me, and so much taken up with his own affairs, that he also took the story of my pretended shipwreck upon trust, and generously refused some jewels which I offered him. We passed by several islands, and among others that called the Isle of Bells, about 10 days' sail from Serendib, and 6 from that of Kella, where we landed this island. This island produces lead mines, Indian cairns, and excellent campfire. The king of the Isle of Kella is very rich and powerful, and the Isle of Bells, which is about 2 days' journey in extent, is also subject to him. The inhabitants are so barbarous that they still eat human flesh. After we had finished our traffic in that island, we put to sea again, and touched at several other ports. At last I arrived happily at Baghdad with infinite riches. Out of gratitude to God for his mercies, I contributed liberally toward the support of several mosques and the subsistence of the poor, and gave myself up to the society of my kindred and friends, enjoying myself with them in festivities and amusements. Here, Sinbad finished the relation of his fourth journey. He made a new present of 100 sequins to Hindbad, whom he requested to return with the rest next day at the same hour to dine with him and hear the story of his fifth voyage. Hindbad and the other guests took their leave and retired. The next morning when they all met, they sat down at table, and when dinner was over, Sinbad began the relation of the fifth voyage as follows. Right. The fifth voyage. All the troubles and calamities I had undergone, said he, could not cure me of my inclination to make new voyages. I therefore bought goods, departed with them, for the best seaport, and that I might not be obliged to depend upon a captain, but have a ship at my own command, I remained there till one was built on purpose. When the ship was ready, I went on board with my goods, but not having enough to load her, I agreed to take with me several merchants of different nations with their merchandise. We sailed with the first fair wind, and after a long navigation, the first place we touched at was a desert island where we found an egg of a rock, equal in size to that I formerly mentioned. There was a young rock in it just ready to be hatched, and its bill had begun to appear. The merchants whom I had taken on board, and who landed with me, broke the egg with hatchets, pulled out the young rock piecemeal, and roasted it. I had earnestly entreated them not to meddle with the egg, but they would not listen to me. Scarcely had they finished their repast, when there appeared in the air at a considerable distance from us 2 great clouds. The captain whom I had hired to navigate my ship said that they were the male and female roc that belonged to the young one, and pressed us to re-embark with all speed, to prevent the misfortune which he saw would befall us. We hastened on board, and set sail with all possible expedition. In the meantime, the 2 rocs appeared with a frightful noise, which they redoubled when they saw the egg broken and their young one gone. They flew back in the direction that they had come, and disappeared for some time, while we made all the sail we could to endeavor to prevent that which unhappily befall us. Hi Venom, no problem, it's okay, go ahead. Thank you so much for the like button. Good luck with work. They soon returned, and we observed that each of them carried between its talons rocks of a monstrous size. When they came directly over my ship, they hovered, and one of them let fall a stone, but by the dexterity of the steersman it missed us. The other roc, to our misfortune, threw his burden so exactly upon the middle of the ship as to split it into 1,000 pieces. The mariners and passengers were all crushed to death, or sank. I myself was of the number of the latter, but as I came up again, I fortunately caught hold of a piece of the wreck, and swimming sometimes with one hand, and sometimes with the other, I came to an island and got safely ashore. I sat down upon the grass to recover myself from the fatigue, after which I went into the island to explore it. I found trees everywhere, some of them bearing green and others ripe fruits, and streams of fresh, pure water. I ate of the fruits, which I found excellent, and drank of the water, which was very good. Thank you. Okay, I hope you have a great day, Venom. I need to drink more water, though. Hold on, I'm sorry. I'm gonna get more water. I'll be right back. Water! Water, water! No, no problem. Okay. Next. When I was a little advanced into the island, I saw an old man who appeared very weak and infirm. He was sitting on the bank of a stream, and at first I took him to be the one who had been shipwrecked like myself. I went toward him and saluted him, but he only slightly bowed his head. I asked him why he sat so still, but instead of answering me, he made a sign for me to take him upon my back and carry him over the brook, signifying that it was to gather fruit. I believed him really to stand in need of my assistance, and took him upon my back, and having carried him over, bade him get down, and for that end stooped, that he might get off with ease. But instead of doing so, which I laugh at every time I think of it, the old man, who to me appeared quite decrepit, clasped his legs nimbly about my neck. He sat astride upon my shoulders, and held my throat so tight that I thought he might have strangled me, the apprehension of which made me swoon and fall down. Oh, thank you for following me on Twitter, Marcus. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Notwithstanding my fainting, the ill-natured old fellow kept fast about my neck, but opened his legs a little to give me time to recover my breath. When I had done so, he thrust one of his feet against my stomach, and struck me so rudely on the side with the other that he forced me to rise up against my will. Having arisen, he made me walk under the trees, and forced me now and then to stop, to gather and to eat fruit. He never left me all day, and when I lay down to rest at night, he laid himself down with me, holding always fast about my neck. Every morning he pushed me to make me awake, and afterward obliged me to get up and walk, and pressed me with his feet. One day I found in my way several dry calabashes that had fallen from a tree. Calabashes. I took a large one, and after cleaning it, pressed into it some juice of grapes, which abounded in the island. Having filled the calabash, I put it by in a convenient place, and going thither again some days after, I tasted it and found the wine so good that it soon made me forget my sorrow, gave me a new vigor, and so exhilarated my spirits that I began to sing and dance as I walked along. The old man, perceiving the effect which this liquor had upon me, and that I carried him with more ease than before, made me a sign to give him some of it. I handed him the calabash, and the liquor pleasing his palate, he drank it all off. There being a considerable quantity of it, he became intoxicated, and the fumes getting up into his head, he began to sing after his manner, and to dance, thus loosening his legs about me by degrees. Finding that he did not press me as before, I threw him upon the ground, where he lay without motion. I then took up a great stone and crushed him. Wow. I did not expect him to do that, but I was extremely glad to be thus freed forever from this troublesome fellow. I now walked toward the beach, where I met the crew of a ship that had cast anchor to take in water. They were surprised to see me, but more so at hearing the particulars of my adventures. "You fell," said they, "into the hands of the Old Man of the Sea, and are the first who ever escaped strangling by his malicious tricks. He never quits those he has once made himself master of till he has destroyed them, and he has made this island notorious by the number of men he has slain." After having informed me of these things, they carried me with them to the ship, and the captain received me with great kindness. When they told him that what had befallen me, he put out again to sea, and after some days' sail, we arrived to the harbour of a great city. One of the merchants who had taken me into his friendship invited me to go along with him, and carried me to a place appointed for the accommodation of foreign merchants. He gave me a large bag, and having recommended me to some people of the town who used to gather cocoa nuts, desired them to take me with them. "Go," he said, "follow them, and act as you see them do, but do not separate from them, otherwise you may endanger your life." Having thus spoken, he gave me provisions for this journey, and I went with him. We came to a thick forest of cocoa trees, very lofty, with trunks so smooth that it was not possible to climb to the branches that bore the fruit. When we entered the forest, we saw a great number of apes of several sizes, who fled as soon as they perceived us, and climbed up to the top of the trees with surprising swiftness. The merchants with whom I was gathered stones and threw them at the apes on the trees. I did the same, and the apes, out of revenge, threw cocoa nuts at us so fast, and with such gestures as sufficiently testified their anger and resentment. We gathered up the cocoa nuts, and from time to time threw stones to provoke the apes, so that by this stratagem we filled our bags with cocoa nuts, which it had been impossible otherwise to have done. When we had gathered our number, we returned to the city, where the merchant who had sent me to the forest gave me the value of the cocoas I brought. "Go on," he said, "and do the like every day until you have got money enough to carry you home." I thanked him for his advice, and gradually collected as many cocoa nuts as produced me a considerable sum. The vessel in which I had come sailed with some merchants, who loaded her with cocoa nuts. I embarked in her and all the nuts I had, and when she was ready to sail, I took leave of the merchant who had been so kind to me. We sailed towards the islands, where pepper grows in great plenty. From thence we went to the Isle of Comari, where the best species of wood of aloes grows. I exchanged my cocoa in these two islands for pepper and wood of aloes, and went with other merchants a pearl fishing. I hired divers, who brought me up some that were very large and pure. I embarked in a vessel that happily arrived at Bassorah. From thence I returned to Baghdad, where I made vast sums from my pepper, wood of aloes, and pearls. I gave the tenth of my gains in alms, as I had done upon my return from my other voyages, and endeavored to dissipate my fatigues by amusements of different kinds. When Sinbad had finished his story, he ordered 100 sequins to be given to Hindbad, who retired with the other guests, but next morning the same company returned to dine, when Sinbad requested their attention, and gave the following account of his 6th voyage. It's the 6th voyage this time, guys. Water break. The 6th voyage. "You long without doubt to know," said he, "how after having been shipwrecked 5 times and escaped so many dangers, I could resolve again to tempt fortune and expose myself to a new hardship. I am myself astonished at my conduct when I reflect upon it, and must certainly have been actuated by my destiny. But be that as it may, after a year's rest, I prepared for a 6th journey, notwithstanding the entreaties of my kindred, who did all in their power to dissuade me. Instead of taking my way by the Persian Gulf, I travelled once more through several provinces of Persia and the Indies, and arrived at a seaport where I embarked in the ship, the captain of which was bound on a long voyage. It was long indeed, for the captain and the pilot lost their course. They, however, at last discovered where they were, but we had no reason to rejoice at the circumstance. Suddenly we saw the captain quit his post, uttering loud lamentations. He threw off his turban, pulled his beard, and beat his head like a madman. We asked him the reason, and he answered that he was in the most dangerous place in all the ocean. A rapid current carries the ship along with it, and we shall all perish in less than a quarter of an hour. Pray to God to deliver us from this peril. We cannot escape, if he do not take pity on us." At these words he ordered the ships to be lowered, but all the ropes broke, and the ship was carried by the current to the foot of an inaccessible mountain, where she struck and went to pieces, yet in such a manner that we saved our lives, our provisions, and the best of our goods. This being over, the captain said to us, God has done what pleased him. Each of us may dig his grave and bid the world adieu, for we are all in so fatal a place that none shipwrecked here ever returned to their homes. This discourse afflicted us sensibly, and we embraced each other, bewailing our deplorable lot. The mountain at the foot of which we were wrecked formed part of the coast on a very large island. It was covered with wrecks, with human bones, and with a vast quantity of goods and riches. In all other places, rivers run from their channels into the sea, but here a river of fresh water runs out of the sea into a dark cavern, whose entrance is very high and spacious. What is most remarkable in this place is that the stones of the mountains are all of crystals, rubies, and other precious stones. Here is also a sort of fountain of pitch or bitumen that runs into the sea, which the fish all swallow and turn into ambergris. And this the waves throw up on the beach in great quantities. Trees also grow here, most of which are wood of aloes, equal in goodness of those of Komari. To finish the description of this place, which may well be called a gulf, since nothing ever returns from it, it is not possible for ships to get off when they once approach within a distance. If they be driven thither by a wind from the sea, the wind and the current impel them, and if they come into it when a land wind blows, the height of the mountain stops the wind, and occasions a calm, so that the force of the current carries them ashore. And what completes the misfortune is that there is no possibility of ascending the mountain, or of escaping by sea. We continued upon the shore in a state of despair, and expected death every day. At first we divided our provisions as equally as we could, and thus every one lived a longer or shorter time according to his temperance, and the use he made of his provisions. I survived all of my companions, yet when I buried the last, I had so little provision remaining that I thought I could no longer endure, and dug a grave, resolving to lie down in it, because there was no one left to inter me. But it pleased God once more to take compassion on me, and put it in my mind to go to the bank of the river, which ran into the great cavern. Considering its probable course with great attention, I said to myself, this river, which thus runs underground, must somewhere have an issue. If I make a raft and leave myself to the current, it will convey me to some inhabited country, or I shall perish. If I be drowned, I lose nothing, but only change one kind of death for another. I immediately went to work upon large pieces of timber and cables, for I had choice of them, and tied them strongly together, that I soon made a very solid raft. When I had finished, I loaded it with rubies, emeralds, ambergris, rock crystal, and bales of rich stuffs, having balanced my cargo exactly and fastened it well to the raft. I went on board with 2 oars that I had made, and leaving it to the course of the river, resigned myself to the will of God. As soon as I entered the cave, I lost all light, and the stream carried me, I knew not whither. Thus I floated some days in perfect darkness, and once found the ark so low that it very nearly touched my head, which made me cautious afterward to avoid the like danger. All this while I ate nothing but what was just necessary to support nature. Yet, notwithstanding my frugality, all my provisions were spent. Then a pleasing stupor seized upon me. I cannot tell how long it continued, but when I revived, I was surprised to find myself in an extensive plain on the brink of a river, where my raft was tied amidst a great number of negroes. I got up as soon as I saw them and saluted them. They spoke to me, but I did not understand their language. I was so transported with joy that I knew not whether I was asleep or awake, but being persuaded that I was asleep, I recited aloud the following words in Arabic: Call upon the Almighty, He will help thee. Thou needst not perplex thyself about anything else. Shut thy eyes, and while thou art asleep, God will change thy bad fortune into good. One of the blacks who understood Arabic, hearing me speak thus, came toward me and said, Brother, be not surprised to see us. We are inhabitants of this country, and come hither today to water our fields. We observed something floating upon the water, and perceiving your raft, one of us swam into the river and brought it hither, where we fastened it as you see, until you should awake. Pray tell us your history, for it must be extraordinary. How did you venture yourself into this river, and whence did you come? I begged of them first to give me something to eat, and then I would satisfy their curiosity. They gave me several sorts of food, and when I had satisfied my hunger, I related all that had befallen me, which they listened to with attentive surprise. As soon as I had finished, they told me by the person who spoke Arabic and interpreted to them what I said, that it was one of the most wonderful stories that they have ever heard, and that I must go along with them and tell it to their king myself, it being too extraordinary to be related by any other than the one person whom the events had happened. They immediately sent for a horse, which was brought in a little time, and having helped me to mount, some of them walked before it to shew the way. Shew the way. I think this is a typo. To show the way. While the rest took my raft and cargo and followed. We marched till we came to the capital of Serendib, for it was in that island I had landed. The blacks presented me to their king. I approached his throne and saluted him as I used to the kings of the Indies. That is to say, I prostrated myself at his feet. The prince ordered me to rise, received me with an obliging air, and made me sit down near him. I related to the king all that I have told you, and his majesty was so surprised and pleased that he commanded my adventures to be written in letters of gold, and laid up in the archives of his kingdom. At last my raft was brought in, and the bales opened in his presence. He admired the quantity of wood of aloes and ambergris, but above all, the rubies and emeralds, for he had none in his treasury that equalled them. Observing that he looked on my jewels with pleasure, I fell prostrate at his feet, and took the liberty to say to him, Sir, not only my person is at your majesty's service, but the cargo of my raft, and I would beg of you to dispose of it as your own. He answered me with a smile, Sinbad, I will take care not to covet anything of yours, or to take anything from you that God has given you. Far from lessening your wealth, I design to augment it, and will not let you quit my dominions without marks of my liberality. He then charged one of his officers. I'm sorry. I just drink some water. He then charged one of his officers to take care of me, and ordered people to serve me at his own expense. The officer was very faithful in the execution of his commission, and caused all the goods to be carried to his lodgings provided for me. I went every day at a set hour to make my court to the king, and spent the rest of my time in viewing the city of what was most worthy of notice. The capital of Serendib stands at the end of a fine valley in the middle of the island, encompassed by mountains the highest in the world. Rubies and several sorts of minerals abound, and the rocks are for the most part composed of a metalline stone made use of to cut and polish other precious stones. All kinds of rare plants and trees grew there, especially cedars and cocoa nut. There is also a pearl fishing in the mouth of its principal river, and in some of its valleys are found diamonds. I made, by way of devotion, a pilgrimage to the place where Adam was confined after his banishment from paradise, and had the curiosity to go to the top of the mountain. When I returned to the city, I prayed the king to allow me to return to my own country, and he granted me permission in the most honorable manner. He would need force. What? Sorry, it's written really weird. He would needs force he would needs force a rich present upon me, and when I went to take my leave of him, he gave me one much more considerable, and at the same time charged me with a letter for the command of the faithful, or sovereign, saying to me, I pray you give this present from me and this letter to the Caliph, and assure him of my friendship. I took the present and letter and promised his Majesty punctually to execute the commission with which he was pleased to honor me. The letter from the King of Serendib was written on the skin of a certain animal of great value, because of its being so scarce, and of a yellowish color. The characters of this letter were of azure, and the contents as follows. The King of the Indies, before whom march 100 elephants, who lives in a palace that shines with 100,000 rubies, and who has in his treasury 20,000 crowns, and rich with diamonds, to Caliph Harun al-Rashid, though the present we send you be inconsiderable, receive it, however, as a brother, in consideration of the hearty friendship which we bear for you, and of which we are willing to give you proof. We desire the same part in your friendship, considering that we believe it to be our merit, being of the same dignity with yourself. We conjure you in this quality of a brother. Adieu. The present consisted, first, of one single ruby made into a cup, about half a foot high, an inch thick, and filled with round pearls of half a drachm each. The skin of a serpent, whose scales were as large as an ordinary piece of gold, and had the virtue to preserve from sickness those who lay upon it. 50,000 drachms of the best wood of aloes, with 30 grains of camphire as big as pistachios. And lastly, a female slave of ravishing beauty, whose apparel was all covered over with jewels. The ship set sail, and after a very successful navigation, we landed at Bussorah, and from thence I went to Baghdad, where the first thing I did was to acquit myself of my commission. I took the King of Serendib's letter, and went to present myself at the gate of the Commander of the Faithful, followed by the beautiful slave and such of my own family as carried the gifts. I stated the reason of my coming, and was immediately conducted to the throne of the Caliph. I made my reverence, and after a short speech, gave him the letter and present. When he had read what the King of Serendib wrote to him, he asked me if the prince were really so rich and potent as he represented himself in this letter. I prostrated myself a second time, and rising again, said, Commander of the Faithful, I can assure your Majesty, he doth not exceed the truth. Nothing is more worthy of admiration than the magnificence of his palace. When the prince appears in public, he has a throne fixed on the back of an elephant, and marches betwixt two ranks of his ministers, favorites, and other people of his court. Before him, upon the same elephant, an officer carries a golden lance in his hand, and behind the throne there is another who stands upright with a column of gold on the top of which is an emerald half a foot long and an inch thick. Before him march a guard of 1,000 men clad in gold and silk, and mounted on elephants richly caparisoned. Oh, this is a new word. I'm not sure what this is. While the king is on his march, the officer who is before him on the same elephant cries from time to time, with a loud voice, Behold the great monarch, the potent and redoubtable Sultan of the Indies, whose palace is covered with 100,000 rubies, and who possesses 20,000 crowns of diamonds. Behold the monarch, greater than Solomon, and the powerful Maharaja. After he has pronounced those words, the officer behind the throne cries in his turn, This monarch is so great and so powerful. Must die, must die, must die. And the officer before replies, Praise be to him who liveth forever. Furthermore, the King of Serendib is so just that there are no judges in his dominions. His people have no need of them. They understand and observe justice rigidly for themselves. The Caliph was much pleased with this account. "The wisdom of that king," said he, "appears in his letter, and after what you tell me, I must confess that his wisdom is worthy of his people, and his people deserve so wise a prince." Having spoken thus, he dismissed me and sent me home with a rich present. Sinbad left off, and his company retired, Sinbad having first received 100 sequins, and the next day they returned to hear the relation of his 7th and last voyage. We are on the last voyage, guys. The 7th and the last voyage. "Being returned from my 6th voyage," said Sinbad, "I absolutely laid aside all thoughts of traveling, for besides that my age now required rest, I was resolved no more to expose myself to such risks as I had encountered, so that I thought of nothing but to pass the rest of my days in tranquillity. One day, however, as I was treating my friends, one of my servants came and told me that an officer of the Caliph's inquired for me. I rose from the table and went to him. "The Caliph," said he, "has sent me to tell you that he must speak with you." I followed the officer to the palace, where, being presented to the Caliph, I saluted him by prostrating myself at his feet. "Sinbad," said he to me, "I stand in need of your service. You must carry my answer and present to the king of Serendib. It is but just I should return his civility." What's this? Oh, hi Notok bro. Ooh, Star Wars fun facts. Cool. What's this? Oh my gosh, this is really long. I will read it for everybody in the chat as well. Star Wars fun fact. All the Geonosians are extinct after the Clone Wars. I'm not sure how this relates to the story, but let's see. After the Clone Wars, the only remaining one is the last queen of the Geonosis, Katrina the Great, but when she was born she had no womb without a womb. Oh, without a womb she can't repopulate her species until she made a womb out of an old droid factory and made Geonosian droid hybrid, calling them her children. Oh, that's interesting. But when Darth Vader arrived on Geonosis, he found Katrina and took her womb, and later she died because of blood loss. Oh, that's so sad. When did that happen? Very interesting, though. Thank you so much for that story. Okay, so let's move on. The commander of the Caliph was to me like a clap of thunder. "Commander of the faithful," I replied, "I am ready to do whatever your majesty shall think it fit to command, but I beseech you most humbly to consider what I have undergone. I have also made a vow never to go out of Baghdad. Hence I took occasion to give him a full and particular account of all my adventures, which he had the patience to hear out. As soon as I had finished, 'I confess,' said he, 'that the things you tell me are very extraordinary, yet you must for my sake undertake this voyage which I propose to you. You will not only have to go to the Isle of Serendib and deliver the mission which I give you, for you know it would not comport with my dignity to be indebted to the king of that island.' Perceiving that the Caliph insisted upon my compliance, I submitted and told him that I was willing to obey. He was very well pleased and ordered me 1,000 sequins for the expenses of my journey. I prepared for my departure in a few days, and as soon as the Caliph's letter and present were delivered to me, I went to Bussorah, where I embarked and had a very happy voyage. Having arrived at the Isle of Serendib, I acquainted the king's ministers with my commission, and prayed them to get me speedy audience. They did so, and I was conducted to the palace, where I saluted the king by prostration according to custom. The prince knew me immediately and testified great joy at seeing me. 'Sinbad,' said he, 'you are welcome. I have many times thought of you since you departed. I bless the day on which we see one another once more.' I made my compliments to him, and after having thanked him for his kindness, delivered the Caliph's letter and present, which he received with all imaginable satisfaction. The Caliph's present was a complete suit of cloth of gold, valued at 1,000 sequins, 50 robes of rich stuff, 100 of white cloth, the finest of Cairo, Suez, and Alexandria, a vessel of agate, broader than deep, and an inch thick. Water breaks are. A vessel of agate, broader than deep, an inch thick, and half a foot wide. The bottom of it represented, in bas relief, a man with one knee on the ground, who held a bow and an arrow ready to discharge at a lion. He sent him also a rich tablet, which according to tradition belonged to the great Solomon. The Caliph's letter was as follows. Greeting. In the name of the sovereign guide of the right way, from the dependent on God, Harun al-Rashid, whom God hath set in the place of the vicegerent, his prophet after his ancestors of happy memory, to the potent and esteemed Raja of Serendib. We received your letter with joy, and send you this from our imperial residence, the garden of superior wits. We hope when you look upon it, you will perceive our good intention and be pleased with it. Adieu. The king of Serendib was highly gratified that the Caliph answered his friendship. A little time after this audience, I solicited leave to depart, and had much difficulty to obtain it. I procured it, however, at last, and the king, when he dismissed me, made me a very considerable present. I embarked immediately to return to Baghdad, but had not the good fortune to arrive there so speedily as I had hoped. God ordered it otherwise. 3 or 4 days after my departure, we were attacked by corsairs, who easily seized upon our ship, because it was no vessel of force. Some of the crew offered resistance, which cost some of them their lives, but for myself and the rest, who were not so imprudent, the corsairs saved us on purpose to make slaves of us. We were all stripped, and instead of our own clothes, they gave us sorry rags, and carried us into a remote island where they sold us. I fell into the hands of a rich merchant, who, as soon as he brought me, carried me to his house, treated me well, and clad me handsomely for a slave. Some days after, not knowing who I was, he asked me if I understood any trade. I answered that I was no mechanic, but a merchant, and that corsairs who sold me had robbed me of all possessed. But tell me, he replied, can you shoot with a bow? I answered that the bow was one of my exercises in my youth. He gave me a bow and arrow, and taking me behind him upon an elephant, carried me to a thick forest some leagues from the town. We penetrated a great way into the wood, and he bade me alight. Then, shooing me with a great tree. Oh my gosh, it wasn't a typo. It really is shooing. Shooing me a great tree. Climb up that, said he, and shoot at the elephants, as you see them pass by, for there is a prodigious number of them in this forest. And if any of them fail or fall, come and give me notice. Having spoken this, he left me victuals and returned to the town, and I continued upon the tree all night. Hi 171, welcome to the chat. I saw no elephant during the night, but next morning as soon as the sun was up, I perceived a great number. I shot several arrows among them, and at last one of the elephants fell, and when the rest retired immediately and left me at liberty to go, and acquaint my patron with my booty. When I had informed him, he gave me a good meal, commended my dexterity, and caressed me highly. We went afterwards together to the forest, where we dug a hole for the elephant, my patron designing to return when it had fallen to pieces and take its teeth to trade with. I continued his employment for 2 months, and killed an elephant every day, getting sometimes one upon one tree, and sometimes upon another. One morning, as I looked for the elephants, I perceived with extreme amazement that instead of passing by me across the forest as usual, they stopped, and came to me with a horrible noise, in such number that the plain was covered and shook under them. They encompassed the tree in which I was concealed, with their trunks extended, and all fixed their eyes upon me. At this alarming spectacle I continued immovable, and was so much terrified that my bow and arrows fell out of my hand. My fears were not without cause, for after the elephants had stared upon me some time, one of the largest of them put his trunk around the foot of the tree and plucked it up, and threw it on the ground. I fell with the tree, and the elephant, taking me up with his trunk, laid me on his back, where I sat more like one dead than alive, with my quiver on my shoulder. He put himself afterward at the head of the rest, who followed him in troops, carried me in a considerable way, and laid me down on the ground, and retired with all his companions. After having lain some time, and seeing the elephants gone, I got up and found I was upon a long and broad hill, almost covered with the bones and teeth of elephant. I confess to you that this objection I'm so sorry, I read that wrong. I confess to you that this object furnished me with abundance of reflections. I admired the instinct of those animals. I doubted not but that was their burying place, and they carried me thither on purpose to tell me that I should forbear to persecute them, since I did it only for their teeth. I did not stay on the hill, but turned toward the city, and after having traveled a day and a night, I came to my patron. Hello there. You have a very long name. I shall call you Suspicious. Hi, Suspicious. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming to the chat. As soon as he saw me, "Ah, poor Sinbad," exclaimed he, "I was in great trouble to know what was become of you. I have been at the forest where I found a tree newly pulled up, and a bow of arrows on the ground, and I despaired of ever seeing you more. Pray tell me what befell you, and by what good chance you are still alive." I satisfied his curiosity, and going both of us next morning to the hill, he found to his great joy that what I had told him was true. We loaded the elephant which had carried us with as many teeth as he could bear. For when were returned, "Brother," said my patron, "for I will treat you no more as my slave, after having made such a discovery as will enrich me. God bless you with all happiness and prosperity. I declare before him that I give you your liberty. I concealed from you what I am now going to tell you. The elephants of our forest have every year killed a great many slaves, whom we sent to seek ivory. God has delivered you from their fury, and has bestowed that favor upon you only. It is a sign that he loves you, and has some use for your service in the world. You have procured me incredible wealth. Formerly we could not procure ivory but by exposing the lives of our slaves, and now our whole city is enriched by your means. I could engage all of our inhabitants to contribute themselves toward making your fortune, but I will have the glory of doing it myself." To this obliging declaration I replied, "Patron, God preserve you. Your giving me my liberty is enough to discharge what you owe me, and I desire no other reward for the service I had the good fortune to do to you and your city, but leave to return to my own country." "Very well," said he. "The monsoon will in a little time bring ships for ivory. I will then send you home, and give you wherewith to bear your charges." I thanked him again for my liberty and his good intentions toward me. I stayed with him, expecting the monsoon, and during that time we made so many journeys to the hill, and we filled all our warehouses with ivory. The other merchants who traded in it did the same, for it could not be long concealed from them. The ships arrived at last, and my patron himself, having made choice of the ship wherein I was to embark, loaded half of it with ivory on my account, laid in provisions in abundance for my passage, and besides obliged me to accept the present of some curiosities of the country of great value. After I had returned him 1,000 thanks for all his favors, I went aboard. We set sail, and as the adventure which procured me this liberty was very extraordinary, I had it continually in my thoughts. We stopped at some islands to take in fresh provisions. Our vessel being come to a port on the mainland in the Indies, we touched there, and not willing to venture by sea to Basora, I landed my proportion of the ivory, resolving to proceed on my journey by land. I made vast sums by my ivory, bought several rarities for presents, and when my equipage was ready, set out in company with the large caravan of merchants. I was a long time on the way, and suffered much, but endured all with patience. When I considered that I had nothing to fear from the seas, from pirates, from serpents, or from other perils to which I had been exposed. All these fatigues ended at last, and I arrived safe at Baghdad. I went immediately to wait upon the Caliph, and gave him an account of my embassy. The prince said that he had been uneasy as I was so long on returning, but that he had always hoped that God would preserve me. When I told him the adventure of the elephants, he seemed much surprised, and would never have given any credit to it had he not known my veracity. He deemed this story, and other relations I had given him, to be so curious that he ordered one of his secretaries to write them in characters of gold, and lay them up in his treasury. I retired well satisfied with the honors I received, and the presents which he gave me, and ever since I have devoted myself wholly to my family, kindred, and friends. Sinbad here finished the relation of his seventh and last voyage, and then addressed himself to Hindbad. "Well, friend," said he, "did you ever hear of any person that suffered so much as I have done, or of any mortal that has gone through so many vicissitudes? Is it not reasonable that, after all this, I should enjoy a quiet and pleasant life?" As he said this, Hindbad drew near to him, and kissing his hand, said, "I must acknowledge, sir, that you must have gone through many imminent dangers. My troubles are not comparable to yours. If they afflict me for a time, I comfort myself with the thoughts of the profit I get by them. You not only deserve a quiet life, but you are worthy of all the riches and enjoy all that you have, because you make of them such a good and generous use. May you therefore continue to live in happiness till the day of your death." Sinbad then gave him 100 sequins more, received him into the number of his friends, and desired him to quit his porter's employment, and come and dine every day with him, that he might have ample reason to remember Sinbad the voyager and his adventures. The end. So, that is the end of the story today of Sinbad and his adventures. Gosh, that was really good. Oof. I think my favorite was the one with the diamonds, and the rock, and the eagles. That was really cool. So, I will be linking the book that I just read in the description below. It's free to download or read online. It's from the Project Gutenberg, and it is an excerpt from the Arabian Nights. The author of the Arabian Nights is unknown because it's a very old storybook. It's sort of like a fairy tale book, and it's a really interesting story actually. It's a story within a story, you know. So I'll leave you guys to explore that book on your own. And it's very interesting. I love it. There's actually a movie version of it that I also enjoy from Hallmark. It's also Arabian Nights, and it's really good. It's really, really good. So, thank you very much, 171. I'm glad that you enjoyed that. Well, that's it for today. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you all enjoyed the book, Sinbad and the Seven Seas, the Seven Voyages. Remember, there's 2 parts of this recording because my stream got cut off earlier today, unfortunately. Anyway, thank you very much for coming.